Hi, and welcome to part 2 of the series of video tutorials on Tidal Cycle's life coding language. Now, in the first video, it was mostly concerned with actually getting it set up. Obviously, not the install part, but just the actual running Tidal and how to make basic sounds and how to import your own sound samples. So this one today, what we're looking into is patterns from a basic level, building up to some more complicated polyrhythmic stuff. So let's start off by, as usual, opening SuperCollider, running superdirt.start. Now for most of these video tutorials, I'm going to be using vanilla samples. If there's any that require samples that I've put in myself that I feel work particularly well with to show certain features, then there'll be download links in the description of the video. But for this one, it'll be mostly just once you get with a vanilla install of Tidal. So here we go. So SuperDirt is currently listening to Tidal on port 57120. Sorry. So now if we get Atom going, if it decides to open, which it is, it's good. It's taking its time, which is nice. There's no rush at all. There we go. Okay. Don't worry about this for now. This is for another piece currently working on. Won't be making something quite as complicated as this right away. Save that maybe for a few videos down the line. So let's start off creating a new file. Again, same as always, open the new file, save it as something.tidal. So go in September 2016. What I'm going to call it tutorial2.tidal. Here we go. So what we had from last time was D1 $sound BD. So we have the bass drum from before. Push that down. And sort of talks about how we can load up different samples and different ones within the folder for each sample. I'm just going to volume down at my end because it's bloody loud in my ears. We spoke about that before. And talks about how you got multiple tracks and stuff. But they mostly going to be looking into how we're actually going to create something a bit more interesting than just, a very simple looping of a sound. So when you've got this going, I believe it's so it's going at the standard tempo, which I believe is there's a function in CPS which is cycles per second. I believe so it's currently going at the standard rate, which is 1. You can, if you change that changes the rate. You can also delete it and ridiculously precise. You can do some very small changes to that, but it's currently going at just a standard rate, which is 1, and that controls the cycling tempo for all of the lines that are going at once. So right now we've just got this bass drum looping around at cycle rate of 1. But if we were to put in, let's go very standard here. If we were to load up a snare drum sound, so the pattern is going bass drum, snare drum. What we then have is going at twice the speed. But if you listen to the bass drum itself, the bass drum is still going at the same speed of 1 cycle per second. But instead, the entire cycle, which is, instead of just being bass drum and now bass drum, snare drum, is doing the whole thing 1 of these per second. So by doing that, splitting up the cycle into 2 parts. If we loaded CP, which is a clap sound, it's got sort of triplet feel, but still doing this whole cycle of 3 3 sounds per cycle. And if you listen to the bass drum, if we remove it, it's the exact same one. So we do bass, snare, clap, snare. The reason I'm doing snare 1 instead of the standard one is that the standard snare, the snare 0 file is a bit similar to the bass drum, I find. So there we go, we've got a sort of pattern going there. And what you can do as well is that you can load up on different lines different patterns of different sounds at different rates. So we could load up a hi-hat here, which is currently coming in for, we have one hi-hat for every 4 of these. So it's the same sampling pattern. Or we could do hi-hat, 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 hi-hat. That's hard to say. So the hi-hat for every single note there. But this is a bit cumbersome to write out like that. A much easier way of doing it would be doing hi-hat asterisk multiply asterisk times, so hi-hat times 4. And if I run D1 silence, so this just silences whatever line you specify here. But if you hear there, you've got the 4 cycles of you've got 4 hi-hats per cycle. But by having it as a number and prevent you from having to type out over and over again, you can really push this to some weird levels. You could do, well, you can do some interesting rhythmic stuff when you have, say, 5/4 sort of polyrhythms, 6/4. You got the sort of like 6 tuplet over a standard sort of bass, snare, clap, snare pattern. Same with downtuplets, dodecatuplets, is that thing? But you could also push it to 20 and push it into 6. And the more and more you push it up, you're going into sort of more pitch-based stuff. 100. And you break it. And once you push it up to a certain level, because you're loading up, well, there's loading 200 samples per second just on this line alone, never mind the 4 per second there, it's a little bit intensive on SuperCollider, and SuperCollider doesn't like it and stops you from doing that. But the interesting thing here is, let's silence it. So we've got the hi-hat there. So that's doing 2 hi-hats, but so that's the hi-hat sample at index 0 in the folder. But if you listen to one, it's a 1. It's more sort of crash, right? So if I were to do this pattern, you get that sort of effect. But if I did hi-hat times 2, well, I'll show you what it's doing actually. If you were to run hi-hat, then the sort of crash one, you get the sort of triplet effect as it's doing. This is the whole cycle. But if you do this, it's a different effect. It's still treating this as 1 unit and 1 unit. So it's actually splitting the cycle into essentially two parts. This is the first part of the cycle, second part of the cycle, and it's doing those evenly over the duration. But it's then splitting this part into 2, which is essentially a sort of, it's essentially taking this half of the cycle and treating it as its own separate unit, which has then got a sort of subdivision inside. And you could do that 3, 4, let's do 10. So it's taking that first half of the cycle, splitting it up into 10, so it's doing later very, very quickly, and then this half has just got the 1 sound, so it's perfectly fine like that. Which is the equivalent. I mean, there's a sort of shorthand way of writing it where if you use square brackets to separate it off, you can clearly identify your, I mean this is largely unnecessary to do for most cases, but you can use this to, well there's a more manual way to do it. You can use square brackets to manually dictate what are your individual parts of your cycle. So if you use snare 1, so you can put entire patterns, full patterns within the square brackets. And if I do this, it is quite a bizarre pattern. What it's going to do is it's going to treat the entire cycle, that's going around at this rate of 1 cycle per second, and it's going to split it into 3 parts. This part, then this part, and this part. And each of the 3 parts will get equal durations in which to run all of their individual parts. So it's going to take that full cycle, split it into 3 parts, and then the first third is going to be split amongst those 2. Then the second part is going to have this 1 sample, and the third part is going to have these 4 samples. So you get some really quite interesting rhythmic effects going amongst that. So I'll just run this line. I've no idea what it's going to sound like, but let's find out. So you got sort of interesting breaking up of the component parts, and obviously this can go into whatever level you're wanting it to go to. Because for instance, I could then, so say I've got this third part here, which is split into 4. I could then do a subdivision of this and change this clap into a clap and a clap 1. So it's 2 different clap samples. And you can do brackets within brackets within brackets to subdivide individual parts of your cycle by individual parts of your cycle. It's worth just playing about with, really. But the other thing you can do is, as well as doing this sort of thing, you can also do various polyrhythms. I'll give an example here. So if I were to put, I'm just going to put this all in one big square bracket here. Bass drum, bass drum, bass drum, snare, clap, snare, clap. So if I was just to run this, this is going to be split the cycle into 7 equal parts. So you have that sort of feel of where it's going around the rhythm 7. Except you can also layer this up as a polyrhythm by using a comma at a certain point in there. So what's going to do here is actually going to layer them up quite interestingly, where you have the bass drum, where it's actually quite similar to what would be the case. Well, I'll run this. It's complaining with something. So you've got the polyrhythm there, which is, and what you've essentially created on one track is the equivalent of running bass drum, bass drum, bass drum on this track, and then snare, clap, snare, clap, and it's the same thing, except the difference is this is only using one track, leaving the further 8 tracks to be used forever. And you can use commas and break off as many parts as you want. You can do HH times 6. And you can do this to any extent that you want, and then you can have these broken up into, this is where it starts to get a bit ridiculous. You have these broken up into so you can have the individual parts of the polyrhythms then being subdivided into little parts. Then you can break these up. So there you go, it's actually just running the 2 of these at the same time. or you could do this 1 times 2. You can really get some quite bizarre and interesting effects. I mean, there's fairly reasonably simple rhythmic stuff using bass drum snares and claps and hi-hats, but you can sort of imagine what you get with that if you start using more complicated samples, if you use human voice samples, for instance. And you can, I mean, well, I'll copy for one of the examples from the Tidal reference, but you can get some really, yeah. If you play about with all these individual parts, you can wind up getting an incredibly sort of complicated and quite dense, quite incredibly complicated and quite dense sort of rhythmical patterns, all all running just one line of code and all just on one track, which is a bit ridiculous, really. I mean, just for how much you can really manage. I'm missing a bracket there, that's fine. Yeah. And then this is OD next. So this is one of the examples from the actual Tidal reference itself, but so for every cycle it's doing 3 bass drums. It's then doing a cycle that is broken up into snare, the first half snare, then second half clap, then doing a third cycle which is broken up into 4 parts of, for the third cycle which is broken up into 4 parts, which is initially RP, then RP, RP, so that's sort of the 2 notes close together, and then 2 more RPs, which is just that sort of pitch based thing, and ODX, which I'm not entirely sure what that sample is, but that's happening once per cycle. And I could do another RP. I could pick a different RP, pick one. And that's quite, reasonably, it's still reasonably simple on the large scale of what you can create with this, but it's using, that's just using a few different ideas, that's using sort of splitting your cycle into a few parts and your polyrhythms, and just from that alone you're getting quite a reasonably complicated and quite interesting rhythmical pattern, all just from the one line. The other thing that is important to know is, as well as having, well, there you go. The other thing that you want to cover here is, as well as having, so I mentioned that if you have, say, bass drum times 2, or times 4, it's doing it, it's a sort of shorthand way of doing it multiple times per cycle. If you also do divide by 4, it's the exact opposite. It's playing it once every 4 cycles instead of 4 times per cycle, and this works with everything as well. This works with everything else as well, because as much as, well, say you've got this section here. Actually, I'll use their sample. It's really quick, this one. But say I've got this bit here. It's all in bracket. I can multiply by that by 2, and it'll just run this bit twice for this cycle, which you can hear there. Or I can also divide it by 2, which takes double the time to go through this bit here. Or I can do it by 4, and this is affecting all of this as one unit. Or I could do, I can multiply by this by 4, which creates that sort of effect almost like a phone. But then if I divide the whole unit, which is a part of by 4, So it's a bit bizarre, but you can multiply and divide any sort of complete section by any number. I mean, you could, 4 is quite. I mean, I'm using numbers that are quite tiny for rhythmical patterns, but if you do 5, that'll do 7. You get more sort of polyrhythms and quite complicated patterns. As I say, with most of the stuff that I'm covering in tutorials, and particularly sort of this sort of stuff, I would highly recommend just spending a good while playing about these sort of ideas. Really, if one of the beauties of live coding is that the worst case scenario is that you run a bit of code that's got a typo, or you're using a certain syntax that just doesn't work. Say you're multiplying sound or something. If you run something that doesn't work, worst case scenario, it doesn't run, but you just go back to something that does. I do highly recommend just taking these sort of ideas and playing about with them. I'm going to tidy that up, because I can. That's what that sound was. I was wondering what that was. Then I can separate this off. And you end up with some really complicated stuff. But that should be. I highly recommend going away for a while. I say going away. After you watch this video, boot up Tidal and start running some of this stuff. There'll be. So I'm going to leave a link in the description for this. There's a page on the Tidal website called Creating Patterns. That you'll find references to all this stuff, and I'm going to start uploading files as well. If you want to just play about the numbers and play about some of the brackets and commas and some of the general syntax of it, and you'll see the sort of effects you can get. But I highly recommend doing that.